Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Francois. I'm the Member of Parliament for Rayleigh and Wickford and the Shadow Armed Forces Minister. And it's great to be back here with the Freedom Association, with David and Tim and all of the team. But my purpose this afternoon is to conduct what has been billed as a fireside chat. I was going to bring my rug and get really cosy, but really to be an interlocutor for Nile Gardiner. Now, many of you will know Nile very well. He's the director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation, and he's a great friend to this country. For a while we had a fairly ropey ambassador in Washington, but Nile was doing more to make the British case than one Peter Mandelson. And we've asked him to address the title, Why the United States of America and the Trump administration Back Brexit. So I think the best way to do this is, having given you that title, Niall, and you're extremely welcome here this afternoon, why do they back Brexit?
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Mark, for hosting me today, and thank you very much to the Freedom Association. And it's great to see so many patriots, people who have fought on the front lines for British sovereignty and self-determination. And my former boss, Margaret Thatcher, back in 2002, wrote a book that many of you may have read called Statecraft. And she was the first leading British politician to even suggest that the British people could think about a future outside of the European Union. And this was 14 years ahead of the referendum. And Margaret Thatcher believed with all of her heart that the British people should be freed from the shackles of the tyrannical European Union. And she would have fought with all of her strength for Brexit and for the British people to be free. And today we have to defend that freedom, because there are those here in the United Kingdom leading the British government, frankly, who want to put on the shackles of the European Union again. And we're dealing with a treacherous socialist government in power. That is, in my view, the most anti-British government the British people have ever seen. And we've got to fight to keep the British people free, because who wants a ticket for the sinking EU Titanic? It's complete insanity, but this is the government that we have here in the UK right now. But today I'm speaking primarily about the Trump administration across the Atlantic. And I'm happy to say that in Washington you have a US presidency that 100% supports Brexit, believes in Brexit, and believes in the principles of sovereignty and self-determination. And you have a president in the White House who firmly believes that Brexit is part of his DNA, that the Brexit vote in the UK played a key role in his own presidential election victory back in 2016. And so the support from the United States is absolutely solid. And at the same time, you have the first truly Eurosceptic US president. And President Trump's views of the European Union are exactly the same views that we share and hold in this room. I mean, President Trump believes that the EU is a complete monumental disaster. And the US administration believes in working with a Europe of nation states. It doesn't believe in Euro-federalism. And let's not forget the words of Joe Biden when he was vice president. He went to Brussels and he spoke to European parliamentarians, and he said that Brussels could claim to be the capital of the free world. And some of the most ridiculous words ever spoken by a US official anywhere. And this is the distinction between the Trump presidency and the Biden administration. The Trump presidency believes that Europeans are far better off if they were freed from the shackles of the European Union. So you do have a US administration, the world superpower, let's not forget, who fervently believe that the EU is a huge negative on the world stage, that the EU is an adversary for the United States, and they firmly believe that, 20 to 30 years from now, we'll see a very different kind of Europe. And it's certainly my own view that within the next 3 decades, we will see the collapse of the European Union. Europe will look very, very different to what it does today. And decades of open borders, big government, high taxation, unfunded pension liabilities in Europe, combined with some of the most, appalling so-called leaders in Europe today, not least, of course, Ursula von der Leyen, the so-called president of the European Union, did not receive a single vote from anybody in Europe, I think. In my view, we will see the eventual collapse of the EU. And across Europe, people will, in the coming decades, regard those who voted for Brexit as visionaries, people who stood up for freedom, for democracy, for sovereignty, for self-determination. And Brexit is just the beginning of the end of the European Union. And when we gather decades from now, we will look back upon those who fought for Brexit, including many of you here today, and we just listened to Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, one of the great champions and heroes of Brexit. They will look upon them as people who really stood up for freedom. And thankfully, we have a United States that stands with the people of Britain in the defense of freedom and sovereignty. That's a truly great thing to behold, actually, when you have the world's superpower standing with the British people in the face of a sinking European Union that has been, in my view, a complete catastrophe for Europe.
Thank you. I remember during the 2016 referendum when President Obama came to Britain and told us that we would have to go to the back of the queue if we had the temerity to vote to govern ourselves. And I think the history shows that intervention on his part in that way was completely counterproductive, thankfully. But I wrote a little book about all of this called Spartan Victory, incidentally still available on Amazon. And I remember those battles in Parliament. And I remember night after night, week after week, and Ian and Andrew and others will recall this, watching Keir Starmer, the Labour Party's spokesman, coming up with any ploy that he could think of, right across the House of Commons, to desperately try and keep us in the EU at almost any cost. And I've always believed that Starmer remains a Remainer, and always will. For him, the European Union is an act of almost religious faith. And the reason that really matters now is because Labour's manifesto position was that we would not re-enter the customs union, we would not re-enter the single market. But they did use a euphemism and talk about an EU reset. And that is code for rejoining, but doing it surreptitiously via grandmother's footsteps. In 2016, even up to a week before, the polls said Remain would win, but they didn't. They'll never take that chance again. They'll never have another referendum. They'll never want to overtly put it in a manifesto. So this is how they're going to do it. And then I'd be interested to hear Niall's reaction to how a Trump administration might perceive that. By the way, Steve is doing requests. If anybody wants to pop out, maybe Vera Lynn, a bit of Elgar, whatever you prefer. They have this concept of dynamic alignment, which basically means that if in a sector of activity, and they're starting with veterinary and phytosanitary, they agree to follow EU rules, if the EU change those rules with new regulations or directives, we will automatically comply with them. We will dynamically align with them. And once we've done it in one sector, and the King's speech includes the legislation to facilitate that in the veterinary and phytosanitary area, then they would then do it in another, in auto manufacture or in chemicals. And sector by sector by sector, they would take us back in, because those sectors would cut right across the single market and the customs union. It is utterly underhand, but that is what they're going to do. I know I and my party will fight this tooth and nail, but I'd be very interested, Niall, to know what you think the reaction of President Trump would be to that, President.
Yes, I can imagine President Trump's reaction to Keir Starmer's nefarious plans with regard to going back into the European Union. And I think that President Trump would view this as just complete suicide and a kamikaze mission by Keir Starmer. It's important to grasp that in Washington, Keir Starmer is really viewed as a clown, and his government's a clown show. I mean, this is the conventional view in Washington of the Labour government right now.
He's having trouble back at home, if it's any consolation as well.
Yeah,
but yes, sir.
yes. Starmer is viewed as somebody who has knifed his own country in the back. Now, the Chagos surrender deal, perfect example of this. And we fought in Washington for about 18 months against the deal. Eventually, President Trump intervened and sank the deal, sent it to the bottom of the Indian Ocean where it belongs. And he described it as the most stupid deal that he's ever seen in his life, which it is. I mean, the Chagos surrender deal is the British government giving away British territory to a close Chinese ally and then offering to pay over £35 billion for the privilege. I mean, this is madness. And so the view in Washington of Keir Starmer is that this is a government that doesn't even stand for the British people. And you had Lord Manderson, who is a complete snake oil salesman, selling snake oil in the form of the Chagos deal to the United States. And the president had the good sense to reject it. But this is an illustration of the depths to which the Labour government fell to in deploying Lord Manderson as the British ambassador to Washington. And I think that the president's view of Starmer's plans to try and get Britain back into the EU orbit, he would just see it as completely and utterly crazy and insane, which it is, really. And I expect the president will very likely respond in the coming weeks to all of the talk in the Labour Party about getting back into the European Union. And I think he'll describe it as, it's completely insane. And also at this stage, London and Washington are working on a comprehensive US-UK trade agreement. It's a huge deal. And it's been partially negotiated so far. But I wouldn't be surprised if the president threatens to rip up the deal if Keir Starmer wants to go to Brussels and go on his bended knee before Ursula von der Leyen. And I think Trump's response will be, look, if you want to do stupid things like this, we're not going to do a trade deal with the United Kingdom, because the US does not want to be subject to EU regulations. And the United States wants to work with sovereign nation states. And, Keir Starmer, has been an incredibly treacherous prime minister. Treasonous, really, in his approach on so many things. And we're now seeing this in real time with his talk about ignoring the democratic will of the British people. The 17.4 million Britons who voted to leave the European Union. Keir Starmer is prepared to completely ignore the will of the British people. And I do believe that President Trump will have zero tolerance for that kind of approach.
As we sit today, Niall, do you think there's much understanding in Washington, for instance, not just in the White House, but in Congress, of what this EU reset that Labour are proposing is, and what it really means? Do you think that people on the Hill understand what this government are up to?
I think at this stage, not yet. And so the more they understand what is happening, the less they will like it. And you can be sure, of course, that the Keir Starmer regime has not exactly been informing Britain's US allies about exactly what is happening and what their plans are with regard to the European Union, because they fear the US backlash against it. And I don't think you'll find a single member of Congress on the Republican side who thinks the EU is a good thing for the United States. And there is deeply Eurosceptic sentiment on the right in the United States. But the more the Americans know and hear about what Starmer plans to do, the more they will be prepared and willing to fight against it. And it's vital, I think, for our conservative friends and allies, here in London, to be sending the message across the Atlantic that what Starmer's government is doing right now is fundamentally anti-democratic. It is dangerous. It's anti-American as well, because it will blow up the US-UK trade deal. It will cost a lot of British and American jobs, what they're doing here, actually. And Keir Starmer basically he's a Eurofederalist, along with 95% of Labour MPs.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and his policy is always one of surrender on the international stage, whether it's surrendering to the Chinese Communist Party over the Chagos deal, or surrendering to Brussels over the EU reset. And the more the Americans learn about what is going on in terms of the reality, the more they're going to fight back against it. And I do think that it's only a matter of time before the president directly blasts this from a US interest point of view, because the US cannot move forward with a trade deal with the United Kingdom if Starmer and his Labour cronies and whoever replaces him in his gang of far left-wing Muppets and so on, whoever takes his place, if they move forward with this, they are going to harm US national interests. And when you're taking on the US president, he's going to fight ferociously for what he deems to be the US national interest. But also, President Trump is the most pro-British US president of the modern era. He genuinely loves the British people. He loves the British monarchy. We saw that recently with King Charles III's very successful state visit. I was there at the White House for the arrival ceremony. President Trump gave a wonderful speech where he spoke at length about the immense debt the American people have to Great Britain and the British people for their heritage, culture, history, language. And this is a president who genuinely loves Britain. And the last thing he wants to see is Britain being submerged once again in the EU Titanic. Because not only does this take away the freedom of the British people, but this also directly damages the American national interest as well. And it's in the American national interest to have a very strong US-UK special relationship, a UK that is sovereign and independent, and a United Kingdom that is not tied to the European Union.
Well, I think it's a lesson here, because there was a lot of missionary work that went on with regard to the Chagos deal. There was a pitched battle in Parliament week after week, exposing the weaknesses of the deal, not just financially, but some of the treaties that it cut across. When we put Labour ministers under pressure on, particular clauses in particular paragraphs, and some of us learnt a bit about treaty law from Bill when we were fighting various EU treaties like Lisbon and others. So when we did that to Labour ministers, often they crumbled. But they relied all the time on having top cover from the United States. And I think Ian's gone now, but he, I know, did a lot of missionary work in Washington to explain to officials in the administration what this deal really meant. And in the end, I think when they denied the use of the great irony was they denied the use of the runway at Diego Garcia for the first strikes on Iran. And I think probably in the White House that was the last straw. So it was a combined arms battle between a pitched battle in Parliament and the United States administration asking more and more questions, and then finally, I think, realistically, the president killing the deal. So I think the lesson we should draw from that, Nile, is if we did that over Chagos, we now need to do something similar over the EU reset. And I think there's a job for all of us in our different ways to try and educate our cousins and allies in the United States. Now, I know you wanted to make one point about the Falklands, about some media reports of what I think an official in the Pentagon had said, and I think you wanted to try and clarify the American position on that.
Yes, if I could, clear that up. And there were reports about one single official in the Pentagon sending, in my view, a very stupid email talking about how the US should shift its position on the Falklands. Now, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, set the record straight in an interview with the Telegraph on this. And Marco Rubio said, this is just one guy sending an email in one branch, the executive branch. And I know for certain, 100%, the White House didn't know anything about this email. The State Department didn't know anything about this email. And I've spoken to White House officials about this. This was just one individual in a vast government bureaucracy who sent, in my view, an absolutely stupid email which was leaked. The official position of the United States on the Falklands has not shifted one bit. President Trump hasn't said anything about the Falklands, and you've seen saber rattling coming from Buenos Aires over this. And the best response Britain should give to this is rebuild British military power, double, triple increase defense spending, put nuclear submarines in the South Atlantic, sink any Argentine ship that comes anywhere near the Falklands. This is the response that has to be sent. And ultimately, the defense of the Falklands lies with the United Kingdom. But I believe that if there were to be another war against Argentina, if Argentina is foolish enough to pick a fight over this, that the United States would stand solidly with the United Kingdom. That would definitely be the case with this administration. And any Argentine act of aggression should be met with maximum force from the United Kingdom. And let's not forget what my former boss did with her actions over the Belgrano, sending Argentina's, Pride battleship to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. That's exactly the kind of message Britain should be sending today, that if Argentina dares attack the Falklands, they're going to face the full consequences. And let's be under, no illusions here with regard to Argentina's long-term intentions. I do not believe under the current Argentine government, under Milei, they have any intentions of fighting some future war. But another Argentine administration, a more left-wing socialist one, may be interested in picking a fight. And the UK has to be prepared. And Britain's got to rearm. Just 3 generations ago, Great Britain was the world's dominant naval power. Britain was a world superpower. And Britain has to rebuild its military might, its sense of greatness, and anyone who threatens British territory, the British people, the United Kingdom should be prepared to fight them and defeat them. Right now, what we are witnessing under the Labour government is complete, utter humiliation. This is the reality. The socialists do not care about the British people. They do not care about the Falklands, overseas territories. In fact, they would gladly give away the Falklands or Gibraltar if they could. The handover of the Chagos Islands is an example of the depths of treachery. And we need to see the regeneration of Great Britain as a great power on the world stage. Britain needs to get off its knees, and it needs to be a great force for good in the world, as it has been for centuries in the past.
We would have allowed, I think, a couple of questions, but we've overrun slightly. So to get back onto schedule, I can see Tim looking at me. I hope you'll forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, as he's come all the way from Washington. What I'm going to do is I'm going to allow Nile to have the last word. So you're a great friend to this country in Washington. You're an admirer of President Trump. You're a great Brexiteer by instinct. If I asked you to sum up this fireside chat, what would be the message that you want to leave us with?
Well, firstly, thanks very much for a tremendous discussion, Mark, and thank you for all the work that you do here on the ground in socialist-occupied, London. And,
Thank you. Well,
my message today is that the British people have got to fight for their country, really, because there are those in power right now who seek to destroy it. And the group of people here today, you're on the front line of the defense of freedom, the defense of liberty, the defense of sovereignty, and there are those in power who want to take that all away. And you've got to fight, because this is a nation that is worth fighting for.
Yeah.
This is a nation that really spread Western civilization across the world. And I'm proud of the British Empire and what it achieved. We should all be proud of the monumental achievements that this great nation has achieved. But we have so-called leadership in power right now who care nothing for Britain's past, who literally hate the foundations of this great nation. And Britain has to be truly great again. It has to be a nation that will defend and fight for its freedom and its sovereignty. And all of you here, you have such an important role in the defense of freedom and liberty. Because I can assure you, if the United Kingdom falls, this will be really, it's the end of Western civilization in Europe. It'll be the United States alone. The United States is far more powerful as a force for freedom when its best friends and partners are standing shoulder to shoulder with it.
Yeah.
And the US-UK special relationship is the beating heart of the free world. And we have to fight to preserve it. And we need a world where Britain stands tall on the world stage, where Britain stands up to the enemies of the free world, and where the British people themselves are truly free. And you cannot be free if you're living under socialism or if you're living under the European Union. The EU doesn't believe in freedom at all. It's a tyranny. It's the suppression of democracy and liberty. And Britain must fight for that freedom. And if the British people prevail, then I'm sure the whole of Europe will one day be free. And so this is the fight that we have at hand here. And all of you are really on the front line of that great fight. And it's a real privilege today to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Well done. Very well done. Very, very well done.